I've been noticing in contemporary literature that the prologue of stories has taken on a bit of a weird role lately. It might just be the books that I'm reading, but I'm coming across a lot of authors who spill literary pretense and poetic language into their prologues, writing such abstract, intangible nonsense as the crap we examined last week, and then immediately as we get into the actual story of the book, the writing doubles back and becomes noticeably more grounded and straightforward. The prologue seems like it's the space that the author uses not to describe precursor events to the main story or to set up a framing device or whatever, but to attempt to convey the themes of the text through abstract imagery or even just telling the reader outright. And if you're a good writer, you actually don't need to do this. The themes and imagery of your story should be able to stand on their own, and giving us a microcosm of it that isn't rooted inside the narrative framework is just a waste of time and ink. This is just me saying that we're not going to be going as deep into the grammar and sentence structure this time, if only because the grammar and sentence structure going forward is just way more boring. So let's get back into it, shall we?
Movement 1. Il Prete Rosso. The gondola sliced silently through the dark water of the canal.
So I actually like this line. It's simple and straight to the point, but also kind of flavorful. I mean, it's an awful sentence to open the story with, but more on that later. This sentence is a mood setter meant to help the reader tap into the tone or emotion of a scene more easily. In this case, it's meant to add an air of mystery or secrecy, which it does adequately. It could also be argued that it helps set the scene, because silence and darkness imply nighttime. This is exactly the type of line writers should be trying to craft. Lines that are flavorful, get across the main action, and convey a lot of information in a concise way.
My hired gondolier pressed the craft close against the wall of one of the buildings that lined the waterway, allowing another boat to pass us.
First off, hired is redundant. Second, pressed is not the right word. You don't press a gondola towards the side of a building. You press a gondola into the side of a building. I mean, you wouldn't, but that's the correct use of that verb. Third, and this is the crucial point, the middle of the sentence takes way too long to illustrate just one detail. The wall of one of the buildings that lined the waterway. There's like 4 different elements in play to explain one detail. It's not even an important detail. This just bogs down the sentence, and it's so easily fixed. Just make it the wall of the waterway. We understand what you mean if you just say that.
Ciao, Luca, he called to the other gondolier, his voice echoing loudly off of the stone of the narrow canal, causing me to start. I drew the hood of my cloak closer to my face, hiding it as we passed the other gondola.
Okay, again, too many elements to explain one detail. His voice echoed loudly. That's all you need to say. It doesn't matter that his voice echoed off of the stone of whatever. This action causes your protagonist to start, right? So your protagonist wouldn't notice what the sound echoed off of, they'd just notice the sound. Alyssa Palombo is writing as though she's trying to set a scene and describe a set of actions simultaneously. But more on that later. The next sentence is good until the word hiding. We know what you're doing when you say you're drawing the hood of your cloak closer to your face, and if you take out hiding it and just go from face to as we passed, you can even eliminate a comma.
We drew up to a bridge, and I spied a set of stone steps leading up to the street, the street.
Oh!
Stop, I said, my voice low from within the hood. Let me out of here, per favore.
Am I the only one who gets annoyed by characters switching what language they're speaking in during dialogue? This is a novel. You can specify that your characters are speaking in a different language to what the novel was written in. I mean, I wouldn't do it right here, but even if later on you have a character say something totally incidental like, "Oh, I was approached by a ruffian who couldn't even speak proper Italian," it's still preferable to switching between English and Italian for random, simple phrases.
The gondolier obliged, bringing the boat close to the steps and stopping so that I could gather my skirts and step out, giving me his hand to assist me. I pressed some coins into his palm, and he nodded to me. Grazie, signorina. Buona notte.
I started down the street, peering at the houses, looking for the one where the man I sought was said to reside.
So this protagonist has started twice in the space of half a page. Yes, I know that Palombo is using 2 different definitions of started, but that doesn't take away from the fact that repetition of uncommon words makes for very sour reading. Unless you do it with deliberation and confidence, like I did when I used the word detail 2 paragraphs back, it's going to read awkwardly.
I crossed a bridge over another small canal, the water beneath looking deep enough to swallow both my secrets and me and leave no trace of either.
Double ands right next to each other is a sin that should be avoided, but besides that, this reads like something a try-hard angsty teenager would write. I hope Alyssa Palombo's degrees in English and creative writing were worth the money.
Just beyond the bridge, I found it. I took a deep breath, banished the last of my nervousness, pushed open the door, and, without knocking, boldly stepped inside.
Does anyone else think this sequence ended weirdly abruptly? The rest of the scene is dawdling about with mood-setting details. Ooh, look, there's deep waters and echoes from the stones. And I'll mention that I'm wearing a hood twice and I'm peering around at the houses, looking for the one I seek. And then at the end of the sequence, it's like, oh, I found it, let's go inside. It's also weird that this character is shown to be very quiet, secretive, timid, easily startled, and randomly thinks about her own death for some reason, which tells me she doesn't have very good self-esteem. But then she boldly steps inside? Any aspiring writers watching should always take note of how a reader might interpret every action a character makes. If something a reader interprets about a character's action is not intended on your part, you might want to take a look at it.
The room I entered was not large and appeared even smaller by its clutter. Sheets of parchment covered the table a few paces in front of me, some written upon some blank and many with bars of music scrawled on them. A harpsichord sat against one wall, scarcely recognizable beneath the papers heaped on it. I counted 3 instrument cases throughout the room that each looked to be the right size to hold a violin, or perhaps a viola or piano. A lit lamp sat on the table amongst the papers, and another on the desk against the wall to my right. These, plus the slowly dying fire in the grate to my left, were the only sources of light in the dim room.
So the TLDR of this is, Adriana walks into the room, flames, passion, music, etc. It's largely scene-setting details, and I have a lot to get through, so I'm going to skip over some of it, but if you're looking for a practical exercise, try pausing the video, read through these passages yourself, and see what you can say about them, good or bad.
At the desk, bent over a piece of parchment, quill in hand, sat a man in worn-looking clerical robes.
I reckoned you could eliminate that second comma and say with instead, bent over a piece of parchment with quill in hand. Yeah, you add an extra word in this way, but you actually simplify the flow of the sentence. Also, I've never been a fan of hyphen looking as an adjective. It's so clunky and totally unnecessary. Just say his robes were worn. There's no reason to add hyphen looking on the end of that adjective. It does nothing but make the narration less objective. Why would his clothes look worn if they weren't worn?
He looked up, startled, and I was able to get my first good look at him.
Do I need to repeat myself about how you shouldn't repeat yourself?
Who are you? What do you want? He demanded, scowling as he rose from his chair.
You know, I did think it was weird that the protagonist just barged right into Vivaldi's home.
I took another step forward into the room, pushing my hood back from my face. I seek Maestro Vivaldi, I said. The man they call Il Prete Rosso, the Red Priest.
Fun fact, Vivaldi actually was named the Red Priest. As it turns out, bad fantasy titles really did exist back in the day. This line reveals the weirdly dramatic and formal nature of the dialogue in this story. I'm pretty sure nobody ever spoke or speaks like this in genuine conversation. A normal person would probably say something like, "Are you Maestro Vivaldi?" Whereas Adriana here elects to say, "I seek Maestro Vivaldi." And there's a crucial difference between these two phrases. The first one is a question, and the second is a declaration. A question is asked in anticipation of an answer from another person. It's an implicit acknowledgement that the other person has something of value to speak and offers them a chance to speak it. It's why when we are respectful and hospitable of people, we often ask them questions. People love to talk about themselves, so when you ask someone a question, it's often a much more friendly gesture than telling them a statement. Questions can still be hostile, but even if we're talking about a confrontational scenario, slinging someone a question instead of slinging them a statement is slightly more graceful. When Adriana declares, "I seek Maestro Vivaldi," she fails to incorporate him into the dialogue. She might as well have said, "I seek Vivaldi" to the audience or whatever. When she says it to Vivaldi himself, it comes across like more of a demand. "I have sought you, and I demand your attention." Now, you could argue at me that this is actually the point. Maybe Adriana in this chapter is supposed to come across as a self-centered bitch, but I can't see this reading as intentional. This is the third sentence where Alyssa Palombo has made reference to Adriana wearing a hood. Twice before she's using the hood to conceal herself, but now she's pulling it back. This is the part of the scene where Adriana literally steps forth to reveal herself. Declaring her purpose in being right here, right now, is tied in with that reveal. Adriana declares her purpose here not so much for Vivaldi himself, but as part of the dramatic reveal of her character to the audience. And this is why this line feels so artificial. Declarations inherently read as more dramatic than questions just by themselves. So Adriana declares herself to Vivaldi instead of asking Vivaldi in order to artificially dramatize the moment. This style of dialogue also congeals especially poorly with non-formal styles of dialogue and narration, such as when you use casual modern idioms like sort of.
Humph! He snorted derisively. You have found him, although I do not know that I rightly deserve the title maestro anymore. After all, I have been sacked. I know, I said. I was thinking that as you are currently out of a job, you might be willing to take on a private student.
What a rude girl this is. She barges into this guy's house uninvited in the middle of the night when he could have very well been asleep and then she doesn't even ask. She does not even ask him. If I was Vivaldi in this scenario, I'd tell her to fuck right off.
His gaze narrowed on me again. I might be, he said.
Of course. The narrative demands it, so why would Vivaldi do something sensible and throw this girl out for barging into his house and disrespecting him? That might create conflict, which is way too interesting.
Clearly he expected me to bargain.
Come on.
The corners of my mouth curled up slightly into a smile as I reached beneath my cloak and extracted a cloth purse that was heavy with coins. I trust that will be sufficient for my first month of lessons, I said, as well as your discretion.
This is so rude.
He looked back up at me. Who are you? He asked again. When I failed to answer immediately, he went on. If you can afford to pay me so much, then surely you can afford to have some perfumed mincing fop or other come to you in the comfort of your own palazzo and teach you. Why come here, in the middle of the night, no less, to seek me out?
This dialogue is awful.
That is quite the lengthy tale, Padre, I answered. Suffice it to say that I have heard that there is no better violinist in all of Venice than yourself, and that is why I have gone to such lengths to find you.
What lengths? She found him in his house. It's not like she had to meet him in the basement of an opium den. What could this girl possibly have needed to do to find Vivaldi if meeting him only involves turning up at the right address?
He frowned, not satisfied with so vague an explanation.
I'm not satisfied with so vague an explanation.
You wish to learn the violin, then? He asked. I nodded. I used to play years ago. I shook my head. It has been a very long time.
Alright, so I don't know if this book skips backwards in time at some point to give us the backstory, but if it does, I will say that's cheap and dumb.
I'm not a huge fan, personally, of the whole 3 weeks earlier teaser thing. I feel like, we should start our stories where they begin, not start them where they get interested.
Get out.
What?
No, I'm sick of this. You bang on my door, you beg me to help you, I share something personal with you, and you take a giant shit on it.
And if it doesn't, I'm feeling like I'm lacking some crucial backstory here. Like, I'd be far more interested in this story if it began during Adriana's childhood and I could actually read through her earlier interest in the violin and follow her story up to what made her interested in meeting Vivaldi, but more on this later. Also, this girl is 18. How long could it have possibly been?
5 years to be exact, semicolon.
Oh, thank you.
5 years since my mother had died and taken all of the music in our house with her.
Wow, that's a really concise backstory. What is this, Disney?
Vivaldi nodded absently.
Why would Vivaldi be absent-minded in this situation? A stranger has just barged into his house to demand violin lessons. You would think he'd be interested in this at the very least.
Then turned to remove the violin and bow, which I took to be his own,
Why would they not be his?
I had not practiced before coming to see the maestro.
Hadn't practiced.
Good, he said, more to himself than to me. Good, not bad at all. I can tell that you have a natural talent, and you certainly play with passion.
Fire, flames, passion, flames, etc.
He smiled, and the expression transformed his face. I shall teach you. I assume you have an instrument of your own? I nodded, thinking of the untouched violin I had stolen from my brother Claudio's room.
She has a brother now. Oh, goddammit.
It had been given to him as a gift and was of the finest
Okay,
craft.
stop. Before you rattle on to me about the backstory of this fucking violin, let me tell you that listing out backstory details while in the middle of a scene is the worst, most unimmersive way that you can weave in exposition to your story. The reasons are twofold. First of all, it breaks the flow of the scene, by which I mean the actions of the scene stop dead while the reader is told the details. This means that the reader has to keep the current action of the scene in their head while also simultaneously absorbing new information about the action on the spot. If you've ever needed to double back and remind yourself of what happened literally a paragraph or two ago, chances are this is why. The second, more subtle reason is that it makes the writing more mechanical. The reader is going to start noticing the man behind the curtain if the story just mechanically tells them every crucial detail as soon as the detail is first needed to be known. This is why good writers elect to actually write out their protagonist's backstory in different chapters instead of just telling it piecemeal to the reader while the story is in the middle of other scenes with different goals. You know when a person is telling you a story from memory and then interrupts themselves because they forgot to tell you the detail that you needed to know to understand the point they were getting to? It's like that. And novels don't need to do that because you can draft them. Maybe including a brief backstory with all of these details would have been a better use of that prologue, eh?
Yes, I do, I answered, though it would be difficult for me to bring it here with me.
Difficult for me to bring it here with me is a sentence that needs to lose one of the me's.
The maestro waved this aside. I have one that you may use. You wish to come here for your lessons, then?
Wait, but what's the point of bringing up Claudio's violin if you just had an... Oh, fuck it.
Yes, I replied quickly. Yes, if that suits. Very well, he said, his eyes bright with curiosity. Shall we say 2 days hence, around midday, if that is agreeable to you?
Why does no one in historical or old-timey fantasy literature ever just say Monday or Tuesday or whatever? It's always 2 days hence, or on the 3rd day of spring, or 3 moons from the equinox. I got so irritated with this that I actually looked up the origin of the week system for tracking days, and it goes back to the ancient fucking Romans.
"2 days hence, then," I said, moving toward the door. "Wait," he said, and I stopped. "May I at least learn your name, signorina?"
Wait, she hasn't told him her name yet? They've agreed to a monetary transaction, and she hasn't told him her name yet?
I glanced at him over my shoulder. "Adriana," I said. I could not risk him recognizing my surname, semicolon. So before he could press me further, I pulled my hood over my face again and stepped outside into the late April rain, leaving him to think what he would.
And that's the end of chapter 1. Christ almighty, this is so bad! And that semicolon, so, comma, into 4 dependent clauses is terrible! It's terrible! So ignoring all of the shit writing, shit dialogue, and woeful character actions that don't make any fucking sense, the core problem with this chapter is that it's the first chapter, kicking off the opening scene of a book, or indeed any story, with a significant yet unnamed character traveling to an unspecified location for a purpose to be revealed using a novel transportation is cliché at the best of times. It's a generic trope that's used when a writer wants to inject some instant mystique into a tale. But mystique is like noodles. Long-cooked, expertly served noodles are great, and instant noodles are shit. You'll only opt for the instant variety if you just want noodles and don't care about quality. What on earth am I talking about? This chapter is literally the entire premise of the novel. Adriana begins an illicit relationship with Vivaldi in order to learn the violin. That's exactly what happens. The story shouldn't be starting here. It honestly feels like it's beginning in medias res. That's fine for an action-centric story where the bulk or indeed entire purpose of the story existing at all is for the proverbial meat of it, but Violinist of Venice is a character-driven story. As a character-driven story, the audience will want to know about the characters' backstories. We want to know what informs their demeanor, decisions, and character. We don't need to start in the middle of the action because reading through the characters' backstories is kind of the point. If you read a scene like this that's primarily character-driven without knowing anything about the characters, a lot of the intended meaning and weight behind everything gets completely lost. Adriana is hiding herself behind her hood, but is that because she is genuinely in danger if she gets recognized, or is it because she is reserved and timid? She barges boldly into Vivaldi's house uninvited, but is that because she is utterly mentally determined to meet him, or because she has no regard for social boundaries. Without knowledge into the characters, everything in this scene becomes more or less meaningless. It's why the first sentence, which I'll remind you is one I actually thought was good, is out of place at the beginning of the story. The first chapter gives the author an opportunity to put the audience in a state of mind for the important story beats, but there's a main action already in the scene by the first sentence. The first story beat is already here, and we haven't had any exposure to the characters yet. This is a character-driven romance story, so having time with the characters before the significant story beats is important, unless not knowing things about the characters works to the narrative's advantage in some way. In Sons and Lovers by D.H. Lawrence, Walter Morell becomes the lover and husband to Gertrude Coppard before the readers have gotten a chance to really know his character. But that was the point. Gertrude fell in love so fast that she didn't stop to consider whether Walter was a suitable husband before she married him and discovered, after it was too late and she was already pregnant with their first child, that she didn't know him at all. The first chapter of Violinist of Venice doesn't benefit from the reader not knowing the characters, and you can tell because Palumbo drip feeds us details about them in the middle of the scene. And this is why this chapter is a chore to read through. It also doesn't sell the novel very well as the opener, because an opener like this telegraphs that the story is poorly structured. And that's why shortly after this chapter I gave up on this novel, because it was already bad by this point and nothing I read suggested to me that it might get any better. So I started this series called Book Burning, and my aim is to provide constructive writing knowledge to aspiring writers out there by illustrating what novels do wrong. I hope you've enjoyed the first installment. If you wish to see this series improve with better artwork, better editing, and other general goodness, please consider donating to my Patreon. I use the money to pay the people who help me to produce these videos. Also, if you enjoyed the video, please consider checking out some other videos on my channel, and thanks for watching.